Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I see people are typing, that's a good sign. Okay, hello. So, hello, if it's morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world, welcome. I'm Amanda Davis. I'm the IATEFL YLTSIG Joint Publications Editor. And I'm delighted to be introducing our first plenary speaker in this whirlwind 3-day web conference, Chris Roland.
Thank you very much.
Chris is a teacher and trainer based at ELI.
Hello everyone, let's see if you can make sure you can see me. Can you all see me there? Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, thank you, IATEFL YLTSIG team for letting me kick this one off. I'm basically going to work along an assumption and a paradigm, thinking about lower secondary. And my assumption is, well, thank you first to Ellie for giving me this classroom time and space for me to try out my ideas. So my assumption is, or my premise, is that primary classes are basically activity-based. And when the children move to secondary, they move to a class which is primarily exercise-based. What I mean by that is that in primary, our sort of basic unit of currency is the activity. Maybe it's the game or the song or some colouring, etc. But then that changes a little bit when they shift to secondary. And the basic unit of currency becomes very much more the exercise, especially if we're using course books. What I'm going to talk about today, or what I'm going to share with you, are various strategies for going over exercises, because I believe most of us are working from course books. At least that's my premise. But in a way that saves our students, a little bit of, preserves them a little bit of dignity. Ways that we can, go over exercises, do exercises, cover the course book, but by preserving their humanity and telling them, look, the world still loves you. You may not have colours and materials and songs and beautiful wall presentations like you used to have in primary, could still have, but we still love you. So we recognise you as a person, especially because as they come out of their primary years, they sort of enter into that period of their life where they're questioned. They're not quite so cute anymore, and they're sort of maybe they annoy people even. Sometimes. So they're starting to wonder, does the world love me? So that's the idea there. If you have any questions, please fire the questions away at me as we go through. If I see them and it fits, I'll respond to them in the moment. If I see them and it's going to fit later, I'll respond to them at the end. And if I see the question and I make this kind of face, I probably won't respond to it at all. So, okay, my first idea. First strategy. We often give our students our classes an exercise, or we may do sometimes, and find that people are not even getting round to starting. So the first strategy is one to just give them a nudge to help them start on the exercise. The age, Gordana, we're talking about here, I'm talking about 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm really talking about lower secondary. So, really once they've gone past that tween stage, but 12, 13, 14 is what I'm thinking about, when they've moved from primary to secondary. So imagine you've got your class and you've given them an exercise. Nobody's doing anything. Yes, we can get annoyed. Yes, we can get angry. Yes, we could start saying, why don't you start it? Come on. Or we can go over to the corner of our board and we can just write at the top an S and write the first few letters of somebody's name. Here it's Teresa, and just put a little tick. Somebody is going to ask us, teacher, what's that? Well, that's because Teresa's already started the exercise. And as sudden as that, you'll have two more that have started the exercise. Here it's Danielle and Sarah. Forgive my strange fonts there. And suddenly all the others will be joining in. So we've led in a positive way. And this helps them just change track and get started. So we've got start, we've got an H here for halfway, as they get halfway through the exercise. And we can even, if we want to carry on, we can even put F for finish the exercise. So it's a nice way just to give them a nudge at the beginning of an exercise. If it's a grammar exercise with questions 1 to 10, we do a similar thing. No? Teresa started it, so she gets a tick there, followed by the others. When they get to halfway, we give them a tick. So we're just leading from the front with that one. Does that make sense to you? Okay, thanks. So the next strategy. A lot of our time in our secondary classrooms will be spent going over exercises. And a lot of time will be spent asking people the answers to those exercises. This is just, I think, the world that we inhabit. However, we can do so in a way that is human. So, for instance, here we ask the student over here the answer to number 3. The student doesn't have the answer to number 3. No answer? No problem. It's not, our classes are not general knowledge quizzes. There doesn't need to be any negativity. We're not trying to catch our students out. We're trying to engage them. So, what's number 3? You haven't got it? No problem. We ask somebody who might have. Have you got the question? Have you got the answer to number 8? No, teacher, I didn't get that far. Problem? No problem. So we're just diffusing the situation a little bit. Now let's imagine we're going over an exercise and John over here is not listening to us, and we can see John's not listening. So here's the schema. Here's John up here in red. Can you see my little arrow moving about, by the way? That would be interesting to know. No, okay. So John's up there in the top right-hand corner in red. Now, if you think about it, John's talking to somebody else. John's not paying attention, and we're going over an exercise. John is not going to know the answer to the question that we ask John. If we go, John, question number 5, John's not going to know. So if you think what's going to happen to the dynamic of the class, if we ask John, the dynamic's just going to crash. John is actually the worst person to ask if we want to preserve the dynamic of the class. And we're not going to make John feel good either. Well, my point here is, if we're going over an exercise and John's not listening and we want John to listen, let's not use the question as a disciplinary measure. This is an analogy I sometimes use, question as Cain. We're not trying to discipline John with our question. We want to engage John. So we say, John, listen, I'm going to ask you number 8. And then John has a chance to have a look, to engage with the exercise and to be ready. So we're teaching for success. And even at these small points where we're going over exercise, we can make these micro decisions to leave their humanity, their dignity intact, and also engage people on a more sort of personal level. So we've asked a student the answer to number 7 in an exercise. The student doesn't know, so we move to another student who does know. They give us the correct answer. This is the student in green here. The reason we do exercises is so that people learn. It's not to catch people out. So the ideal is to go back to the first student and say, look, did you get that? Do you understand that now? Again, we're using the question as an instrument to engage, an instrument to help us check their understanding and for our students to learn, rather than using it as the disciplinary measure. And then we can even ask sort of 5 minutes later, once we've finished, if we remember a student gave us an incorrect answer to one of the questions, we can go back and say, so what's the answer to? And see if they remember. And then we've turned it into a thing, almost like a game. The student's not going to mind because we're not doing it in a way where we're trying to catch them out. And the fact that we've turned it into a thing shows, again, that we've noticed the student, that we're seeing them, and that we're thinking about their engagement with the language. Now, some of you will have large classes, some of you will have smaller classes, but we get answers from students on the exercises, on our questions, lesson after lesson. A very nice thing is if we can remember the answers that the students are giving us. Let me give you an example here. So I've got a student at the moment called David, and last lesson we were going over an exercise. I've been lucky enough to be David's teacher for 2 years. This is the second year I've taught him. And whenever I get to teach a student for 2 years on the go, I like it, because I think after the first year, you kind of know where the student's at. And I noticed this week that David was giving me answers with the past perfect. He's a 14-year-old student. He was giving me answers that contain the past perfect and getting them right. So I was able to say to him, well done, look, last year you would not have been able to give me those answers. So again, we're not just using the question as discipline. We're not just using it to anchor people. We're actually trying to remember the answers people are giving us and pushing into not just engage, but also evaluation through the questions. But again, in as friendly a way as possible. And I think these little comments during the class, these make all the difference to our students. I mean, we sometimes forget, obviously we like our students, but to them it's maybe not so obvious. Maybe they don't hear this enough during their working day. Right, let's have a look at this one. So, especially in classes where most of your learners or all of your learners share the same first language, you will have lapses into L1. And this next strategy is, I think, a nice way of dealing with that. So imagine we're in class and student 1 says something to student 2 in L1. They're meant to be doing an exercise, they're meant to be doing a task, but this L1 conversation springs up spontaneously. Student 2 responds. Student 1 says something back to student 2. Student 3 says something to student 2. And then student 4 says something to student 3. And the teacher says, stop. Stop, 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 stop. Wait a minute. Let's see if we can do that in English. So, student 1, what did you say to student 2? And student 2 will say, I didn't say anything. Yes, you did. You started the conversation. No, I didn't, teacher. Yeah, I beg to differ. I've actually written it down over here. You said something about somebody called Monica. And student one goes, oh, yes, I did. So we see if student one can say that in English. And then we say, okay, student two, what did you say next? What did you say next? And then we try to see if we can help them say that in English. And then we go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation and say, okay, do you think you can do the whole thing in English now? And we relive the moment. Again, we're not punishing, we're grabbing hold of this student's own exchanges and just trying to give them the English they need to do it in English. Because if they had that English to start with, they may well have had the conversation in English. If it's a very private conversation, which probably doesn't have place in the classroom, but if it's a very private or a sensitive conversation, obviously we leave it. But if we're listening and we understand and we think, we can help them say that in English, this is a nice way to run it back and pull in their own life narratives to the class. During the course of a lesson, our students are going to ask us lots of questions. Teacher, how do you say this? Teacher, what does this mean? Now, obviously it's our job to help them, it's our job to provide those responses, but sometimes when you've got maybe the class not behaving perfectly, you've got a couple of students over here that you can't get to work, yeah, another student here doesn't understand, another student here is asking you a question, it starts to weigh heavily. And if it's your, fourth or fifth class of the day, we can often see these questions as obstacles, as difficulty. So a student doesn't understand, oh, why don't they understand? Or, what's this word? Maybe you've answered that word, you've given that word 3 or 4 times already that day or that lesson. However, I think, and everybody in this webinar will know this, but it's something that is worth reminding ourselves. If a student asks you a question and you say, good question, that's going to stay in that student's mind, especially if you mean it. Or, I'm pleased you asked that because it's going to give me the chance to explain Again, these are just micro strategies. They're small movements during the very much every day going over exercises or assisting our students. We don't have to really plan them in. They're not going to take any more effort, but I think they are going to make a difference to the emotional terrain of the classroom. So let me give you an example of a strategy I used this week. So here we are in the class again, and we're doing a couple of exercises. This is a class of students ranging from 10, 11, 12 and 13. So there's a range of ages here and there's a range of levels. And they're doing an exercise. Bill has finished the exercise and he's finished the exercise easily because there's obviously a difference. This isn't a webinar about differentiation, but there is a difference between finishing quickly and finishing well. And Bill's finished, and we have a quick look, we can see Bill's got the idea. Mark, on the other hand, he's really having problems engaging with the exercise. He's having problems understanding the sentences which he has to, complete with a word. So if you can't understand the sentences, it's very difficult to know what word to put in the gap. So what we can do on this occasion, we can say, okay, Bill, and it just happens that Bill is the older, one of the older students in the class. Mark's one of the younger ones. So Bill, what I want you to do is I want you to take Mark outside to the blue chairs, and I want you to go over the exercise with him, Don't just show him the answers, but explain to him, you know, the reasons for the answers. Make sure he knows what every question, what every sentence means. And then when you've done that, I want you to test him. Take away the book, read the sentence without the word, you know, leaving the gap, and see if he can remember what it is. Test him from the top down, test him from the bottom up, so he's not just memorizing the words in the gaps. And when he's got that, come back in. Now, obviously, Bill's just received a lot of recognition. He likes that. He's got responsibility, and he gets a transition. So Bill and Mark go out, and what happens next is Mike, who's Bill's friend, Mike finishes. Now, Mike's finished very well. I can see, oh, yeah, he's got that. And Teresa and Melania, they've got problems with the exercise. They're not coping so well. So again, we say, Mike, I want you to do the same as Bill. Obviously, Mike is very happy. He likes the idea of being a teacher. He goes outside, so we're utilising the space outside the classroom as well as inside, but this could be done, obviously, inside the classroom if you've got a large room. But he goes to a slightly different part of the centre of the school, and he takes with him, you know, his 2 students, and again, his responsibility is to test them, to show them what the words mean, etc. So out they go. Just as they're going out, Mark and Bill come back in. Meanwhile, I could go over the exercise with the rest of the students. In they come, they sit down. I say, Mark, come on over, come on over. Okay, so show me. And I hold up the exercise, which I've got in blank, and say, so what's the answer to this one? What's the answer to this one? What's the answer to this one? Okay, what does this sentence mean? He tells me. And when he's finished, we say, well done, Mark. Did you say thank you to Bill? Okay, good. And we say, well done, Bill. Good teacher. And we do the same when Mike brings Teresa and Melania back in. So what we're doing is we are giving recognition. We are increasing the temporary status of a student if they're doing the exercise well. We're giving them a chance to share their knowledge. So we're ticking a lot of boxes there. Do I mean, oh yes, I do. When I say very well, I mean correct. Yeah, Farida. So obviously we're juggling because we've got people, whenever you break lockstep, and you have people in a room doing different things at different times, you have a certain element of complexity. And so the way you're managing the class changes. Again, this isn't a webinar on classroom management and how to manage complexity within a class, but you can see how by breaking lockstep and making student teachers responsible just for a few minutes in this way, we can give them recognition. Bill goes home and Mike goes home feeling really good. And then we can turn, you know, Terry, Mel and Mark, we can turn them into student teachers. If there's a student that's away and they come back the next time, it's like, okay, Terry, Mel, Mark, you remember you did this exercise? Well, Paul wasn't here. Can you take him and show him, all 3 of you? So there's always this trickle-down effect. Okay, next strategy, loose connections. So imagine we're playing a game. The students are in groups of 3, and in one group we have Anna, Tony, and Terry. So let's call them their group Sun. We've got the groups, you know, Sun, Moon, Heart and Flower. They're the Sun group. It's their go first. We ask them a question, and Anna gives us the answer. She's a very ready student. And then we go around the class. We're asking the other teams. We come back to Team Sun, and Anna has her hand up again. Tony in this group, he is not connected to he's like a loose connection. He's not really, he doesn't really maybe understand the question, or he hasn't got the answer. So he's not connected in to the game or the activity. So we say, and this is a very simple tweak, we say, oh, I want Tony to answer. And Anna says, Tony doesn't know, Tony doesn't know, Tony doesn't know. So, okay, you tell Tony, Tony tells me. So Anna tells Tony quite emphatically, and then Tony tells the teacher. What we've done is Tony might not 100% understand still, but now the answer's gone through him and he's connected back into the game, he's connected back into the activity. So by insisting that we receive the answer from a different team member each time, we're encouraging sort of cooperation in the groups, and we're involving everybody. Okay. Personalised writings. So this strategy, the result of it is we create a set of writings from the class. They're all the same length, but they all have different topics. And I'll talk you through this. So first of all, we give each student a piece of paper, tiny piece of paper. And we ask them, write 3 things you did at the weekend that you liked, 3 things that weren't so good about the weekend. Obviously nothing so personal that you can't share it. So they write their little notes. 3 good things about the weekend, 3 not so good things about the weekend. As they're writing, immediately we move into action, we go around, we start having a look. What we're actually doing at this point is we're clarifying for ourselves what these mean. So if there's something we don't understand, you know, what do you mean paint? Oh, I do painting, teacher. You mean you go to painting classes? Yes. So now we know what this student means by paint, etc. Once each student has written 3 things that were good about their weekend, 3 things that were not good about their weekend, we ask them to tell a partner. Okay? Tell your partner, or even better, point at your partner's list and ask them 3 details. So we have a speaking activity, but actually the rationale for this activity, this stage, is again for the teacher just to be able to have a look at all the pieces of paper and clear up any uncertainties for themselves. Then we take in the little pieces of paper. So here you have an example of one of the pieces of paper, the best things and the worst things. The best things, my friends came to my house when I was sick on Friday. On Sunday I met with all my family. I saw my little cousin on Saturday. I had a sprain, was a bad thing. I had to go to the street in a wheelchair. I had to go out in a wheelchair, and I had to do homework. So we're taking all these pieces of paper. As the students are doing the next exercise or the next activity, we just take each piece of paper and turn it into a 1-sentence title for a writing. So with this one, that's the sprain is what I would focus in on. So I quickly write up on a Word document all about my ankle sprain. It doesn't say ankle sprain on the paper, but it did say it on the student because she was in plaster. And that's her personalised writing. Now, what I do is I do this in the classroom, and then I send that to the printer, and then I quickly grab the next piece of paper, which is this one. I saw IATEFL from OT, which is Operation Triumph, which is a kind of talent contest on TV. So we choose a title, What I Can Tell You About IATEFL. Equally, it could be, you know, what I can tell you about my future nephew. So if there are a couple of things, sometimes I'll present them with 2. And what we're doing is we're creating a personalised writing for each student. Now, if you need a little bit more time or you have a larger class, you take all these home and then you just create your 1-line writings in the comfort of your living room or, you know, terrace, office, etc. The standardization comes, even though they're all different titles, the standardization will come because they're the same amount of words and we apply the same marking criteria to the writings. And suddenly we've got students writing about themselves, about things which are relevant to them. And it's very easy to set up. We don't have to think, we don't have to have an in-depth knowledge of the student's life because they've given us our titles there. Any questions about that or any of the others before I move on? Just give you a second to process some of that. Teach. My God. Boss. Okay, well, if you have any questions, keep thinking of them and I'll give you time to hit me with them very shortly. Moving on. So, oh, this was all about my nephew. Oh, we got a question. How would the students turn these notes to a paragraph? Well, they don't really have to, Samira, because going back here, so we're not actually turning this into a paragraph. We're just taking one small detail to generate a title. Not all of the details, the things on their little piece of paper we will be able to use. So we're just looking for something that we can grab hold of to generate our title. Once that's done, this little bit of paper is we don't use anymore. So it's only one detail from the piece of paper. Okay, so again, if we want to reassure our students that we see them, we have to do this on an individual level. It's a one-to-one thing, and I've argued regularly that it's the one-to-one interactions that lay the foundation for collective cooperation in classes. And I think we start by making a space for the students in one-to-one interactions. Let me show you what I mean. So this is my classroom. This is a classroom I'm sitting in right now. You're looking, yeah, that board, which is in the corner just above the cabinet, which is no longer there. It's gone. Okay, and you can see the teacher's chair. You can see the student's chair. You can see where the students sit. You can see where the teacher sits. Now, a point I've often made is that if we ask a student to come and sit with us and show us something, if they come round the table and try to sit down, we enter into an uncomfortable situation whereby the student is falling through thin air because there is nowhere for them to sit. Let me ask you to have a look at this classroom setup. Ta-da! Now, I think the message is very clear here. And it is that sometimes you'll be sat over there with your colleagues, and sometimes you'll be sat with the teacher, showing the teacher something, reading something to the teacher, having a very short conversation with the teacher, or having something checked by the teacher, having the teacher show you something. And that you have a legitimate place in both locations. And you'll see we enter a little bit into semiotics here, because you'll notice that chair is the same type of chair as the teacher's chair. It's, you know, this one. And so we're creating, there is a transition, but there's also a little bit of symbolism there. And often, as is the case today, this other chair is on the other side of the table. I've got it over here. So again, we can do small sort of exam style exchanges whereby we're asking them questions and they're responding. Now, while we're doing this, again, as I said, this isn't a webinar on classroom management, but teachers sometimes ask you, well, how do they come and, how do they come and sit with you or talk to you when you're teaching the whole class? And what we do is when we have students working on an activity, when they're doing an exercise, if you think about it, a lot of the time, That's kind of dead time. Often our students are doing an exercise and we're just waiting for them to finish. So when we give the students an activity and we've got nothing to do, we just say, okay, to the first student, okay, come and talk to me, come and have a sit here. They come over, they transition, they show you something, or you test them very quickly on the previous exercise, they go back, and then it's the next student. Do we get through every student? Not always, no. But what we can do, we can take our register and we can just record who we've spoken to, so it's systematic. And I've done this sort of thing in this size classroom where I have 13 students maximum, and I've done it in classrooms where I have 27 students, and I've had 2 students on either side sometimes, also completing something, showing me something. So however big your class is, if there's some dead time, you can always have 1 or 2 students come and transition and show you something. And I think when they go home at the end of the day and their parents say, what did you do in English class today? The first thing they'll say is, well, I went and sat with the teacher and showed them something, and they listened to me. Question, Farida. What age would you recommend such seating? I would recommend such, well, to be honest, I mean, I start making pockets of one-to-one interaction with the teacher, even in the primary lessons. Once they get to about, no, I've done it with 6-year-olds. So imagine that everybody's doing a task and you have a set of flashcards, 6 flashcards and 6 corresponding word cards. And you can ask the students to come up and then match the cards, and you can just sit with them. Another student might come up and ask you for help, especially if they're 6, but you can still do it as young as primary, as you know, lower primary even. So any age, you know, you can go and sit with the teacher and show them something. So we also need to make time to listen to them. So this is me doing exactly that. In a normal class, this is a busy class. Again, this is exam preparation, but this student comes up. We set the 1-minute Flash Tools timer. Actually, I set it for 1 minute, 8 seconds, so that they get 8 seconds, because that's how long it takes me to transition from the Flash Tools timer to the picture. Ready, steady, go, and the student describes the picture. And you can just see a course book over here. The other students are doing an exercise, so they already have something to do. This student speaks for a minute. I write just a couple of ideas. You know, you could use this word, and this word is pronounced like this. Thank you, teacher. They go back, sit down, and then if there's time, I do another student like that. If there isn't, then we go over our exercise. But they know that whenever there is time, whenever everybody is focused, then we'll have some more one-to-ones and people can practice themselves. And in this class, the students actually requested this type of training. So I think somebody said earlier, why does the teacher always decide? Well, here, I was actually responding to what the students wanted. And again, we might not get through everybody in the same lesson, but sooner or later, if we keep track, everybody gets that one-to-one interaction and transition. The quiet ones. So I have a student this week who was working away really well all day. Now, sometimes I think the quiet ones, we can forget about the quiet ones, but the quiet students are actually the ones that drive your classes. Sometimes it's a couple of sort of louder students or the couple of students who finish more quickly that draw our attention. But those quieter students are very important. So I said to this student, I said, at the end of the lesson, I said, you've worked really nicely all day. You've worked independently, you've got on with the work, and you did it really nicely. Well done. It's so easy if a student isn't any trouble, just to let that go by and focus on the ones that are causing us trouble. So again, just a little micro strategy, you know. Every lesson, congratulate a quieter student or somebody who's just done everything nicely without causing any fuss, and show them that they're noticed as well. And then they'll stay being, you know, a responsible student. They won't need to transition to any tangential behaviour to get extra recognition or attention from you. Okay, so imagine that you're in your classroom and a student comes in, and they come in slightly before the others. It's the first student. There's always a first student to enter the room. And you say, hi. You say, did you have a good weekend? Now, this student may well think you're just being polite. So they'll probably say, yes, thank you, teacher. Oh, okay. But if it's more than a display question, we can keep asking. So, yeah, this student here, she thinks that I'm just asking to be polite, so she's not investing much here. And then I come with another question. Did you watch the football like everybody? Because there was a local football derby. And she says, no, I don't like it. Oh, okay. So, a little correction. I don't like it. I don't like it. Yeah. So, well, what sports do you like? And at this point, she thinks, oh, you know, I think the teacher's actually talking to me. So she says, volleyball. I like volleyball. Then the teacher asks her where she plays or when she plays. And she says, Tuesdays, Thursdays. And then the teacher realizes, today's Tuesday. So you played today. You can see what we're doing here. We're not letting go of the conversation. We're staying like, you know, like a dog, holding onto a stick tenaciously. But the student now realizes that they're in a real conversation and the teacher is actually interested. So then we ask them what position they play. At this point, my student told me a Spanish word, colocadora, which I didn't know. So we looked it up together quickly, and it said setter. That was the position in volleyball I wasn't aware of. And at this point, the others are coming in, and we stop our conversation. But what we've got there is now she plays twice a week, she's learnt the word for colocadora, and she's had a genuine conversation. It's very easy, especially at the beginning of the lesson, when we're trying to set up, just to, you know, to have these superficial, how are you, did you have a good weekend? Yeah, what did you studying? Ah, okay, yeah. And then we continue preparing our lesson for the, but actually insisting a little bit and asking a little bit more will get you, when they realize it's not just a display conversation, it'll get you much more valuable practice, and you'll probably be able to, you'll be able to give them some language they didn't have before, which is the aim of our English lessons. So I would like you to imagine two situations. So version 1, Antonio's 15 and he arrives at class, breathing heavily, and the teacher says, yeah, come on, sit down, Antonio. Open your book up, it's Unit 7A, page 155. We're doing the present perfect and the present perfect continuous. Antonio sits down, and then he starts to match pictures of people who've been digging in their garden, writing letters all day, baking cakes, etc. That's one version. Imagine the same event, but a slightly different version. So, you know, flashback. Okay, version 2. Antonio rocks up to class. Antonio's breathing hard, and the teacher stops and asks Antonio, you know, or asks the class, what has Antonio been doing? And the class look and they say, we don't know what he's been doing. Well, look at him. Ah, okay, he's run, teacher. He's run, he's been running. Yes, and we write that on the board. Antonio's been running. Then we look at Antonio. Have you been running, Antonio? Yes, teacher, yes. Why have you been running? And then Antonio tells us a story about how he left his rucksack in the doctor's waiting room, and he's just had to run back and get it and then run back to school. And again, we can board this. The moment we start writing it, we make Antonio's personal narrative, we make it accessible to the collective, and we can use it just like we'd use a text in any book. And we're looking at the present perfect, we're looking at the present perfect continuous, we've just bent it round a student's narrative. So again, when there are those, I mean, each student comes to class, the class forms part of their morning or their afternoon. It forms a continuum. They've all had a before the class, they'll all have an after the class, and sometimes we can pull these in and use that, as well as their own conversations in L1, to generate and to examine our target items and target structures. Are you all still alive there? Brilliant, magic. Okay, thank you very much for that. It's good. Okay, another little strategy. If I ask you to think about your trickiest class, probably the faces of the most vocal students will jump into your mind. Now, this is a strategy that I've shown quite a lot, so forgive me if you've seen it before. But what I like to do is something like this. This is my wheel of fortune. It's got a splitter pin in the middle, so it turns. But I never spin it. I just turn it by one increment. So as I'm planning the lesson for the day, I'll turn it once, and whoever's at the top is the student who I think about as I'm planning that lesson. Now, this is something that I do for primary as well as sort of lower and middle secondary. As I'm planning, I make sure, let's imagine that it's, let's call him Richard at the top. I'm going to make sure that today I plan the lesson thinking about a student of Richard's level, that I try to make 2 minutes to speak to Richard, to listen to Richard. Today it's his day. And then the next lesson I plan, I turn it, and then at the beginning, and that helps me focus on the student, the next student there. So this is a way of sharing out our teacher attention, even at the planning stage. I don't actually turn it in the lesson. Sometimes I don't use faces like this. This is a very sort of visual way. Sometimes I just use little dots on the register, but I'm trying to share out my thinking even before the lesson has started. And if you do have some challenging students in the class, this helps you sort of see past that and think about everybody. How are we doing? Okay, I'm going to stop very soon and take some questions. So I just want to tell you one more thought I've had. Well, actually, no. Let me show you a few pieces of news, then I'll take questions from you. So, anybody in the Moscow area next weekend? We've got the ELT Trends Festival, and I'll be back in Moscow later on in November with an intensive 2-day course for teens and primary. And ELT Trends is where you need to go for that one. If anybody's in London, planning to be in London in the summer, then I'm running 2 courses for the Lexical Lab for Hugh and Andrew. One is on teaching teens, July the 20th for a week, and one is on teaching primary, July the 27th for a week. They're 17.5 hours each course. So you get lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of ideas. And finally, the methodology book that some of these ideas come from is this one, Understanding Teenagers in the ELT Classroom. There is my website, chrisrolandelt.com, and my Facebook as well. Okay, we've got a few minutes, so I'll open it up for questions and try to answer as many as I can. I will say hello to Mr. H. Gordana. I see that. How do you feel with students looking at their mobile phones during a lesson? Okay, Sinem, well, I don't want to take the students' mobile phones away. I mean, I could do. In our centre, we've got one of these in every class, so we could actually take the mobile phones and put them here. And occasionally they do that, but what I prefer is that they learn to use their mobile phones correctly, which is not using them during the lesson. So I had a student who is 11 last week. He went out of the class to the toilet, and the other students looked and look, his mobile phone's on the chair. He's brought his mobile phone to class. I said to them, no problem. I've never seen him using it. It's not a problem if he's got it, but he's not using it. So he's using it correctly. So that I prefer that. But I know some institutions don't allow the mobile phones in school. I think that's perfectly reasonable as well. Gordana, you haven't understood the Wheel of Fortune idea. Well, the Wheel of Fortune is basically. Let me show you. This is an old one. This is an old one for primary. But what we're doing is we just move it by one student each day, but the teacher moves it at the point of planning. So it helps the teacher think about one particular student as they're planning. And then that student gets to be the class monitor or the team leader, etc. This one's a little bit damaged because this is from last year. You're all very welcome. How do you deal with classes with multiple nationalities? At the moment, I teach mostly sort of homogenous classes here in Seville. So it's quite a long time since I taught. I think the last time I taught classes with various nationalities was when I was teaching in Syria, in Damascus. My straight answer is with sensitivity. But again, trying to value their personal narratives and the different narratives they bring to class. Sometimes we can exploit these, we can ask them to share, or sometimes we just provide them with respect and space. Roland, hello Chris, do you know some website to select students in groups? Okay, no, but I'm going to give you another idea that I like. So I just call it the combinations. So what I do is I sit at home and I think about who I want to sit together in groups when they're doing grammar exercises. And then I think who I want to sit together in groups when I want a mixture of student ability. And I think who I want to sit together in groups when I want them of all similar ability in the group. And I write these combinations of students here. So this might be, Mary and Paul. Here it might be, George, Mary. And there's a list of groups here. And then I put this next to the board and I say, when I say combination A, I want you to get into these combinations. When I say combination B, I want you to get into these. So it's not random. I mean, one of my mottos is, random choices bring random results. So this is not random, but it allows you to sit at home and figure out who works best in various situations. Okay. Do you use apps or online resources? I'm not a very appy person, to tell you the truth, but we do use email quite extensively. I have my students send me audios of work that we do in class, and I often use that as consolidation. So I'll say, now I want you to go home, record yourself reading the correct answers to the exercise we did. If it's been a challenging exercise, then send me the audio. So I do use email and audio, student-generated audios, quite extensively. Catherine, that's what if teenagers don't want to study, they say, why should we? What reasons would you give? And how would you motivate them? That's for next time's webinar. That's a whole new webinar. But thank you. That's a very big question. And Jana as well, the motivation. So maybe next time I can do a session on motivation.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your plenary, for kicking off the web conference. I think you've given us all plenty of food for thought. Plenty of things we can try out with our students, and thank you so much for that. I think it was very useful, as we can see from all the comments. Okay, so we're up and running. Our next talk will be in just over 5 minutes. So we've got a 5-minute break now, and we'll be back with Rachel Pooley very soon. Okay, thanks, Chris.